Michelle,
Daniel,
OG
OG
Rose.
Rose, and what you been thinking about?
What you been thinking about, Daniel?
You. Okay. You want
Let's do
okay.
rock, paper, scissors, rock,
Rock,
paper,
paper,
scissors,
scissors,
shoot.
shoot.
Rock,
Rock,
paper,
paper,
scissors,
scissors,
shoot.
shoot. Okay, that means you go.
Yeah. Is
That
that how
means
you get
you
to define
go.
the terms? Oh
I've
my
been
gosh,
fighting
you won.
Deleuze, but that doesn't mean I. Does that mean I get go or that I choose? We didn't actually specify that. I've been
You
thinking
did.
about Deleuze.
Okay. What you
Oh,
mean?
the eternal war.
Well,
It's
can we
not a
get?
war. He's really interesting. I mean, he's really interesting, and I just think early, late Deleuze, and
He was
Terence,
a French philosopher, right?
yes, with Guattari and different things. I guess I'm
Guattari.
trying to get a hold. I guess I'm trying to get a better hold on what exactly he means
Mm-hmm.
with transversal,
Hmm.
like what that term means. It
Hmm.
seems really important in Deleuze, and it's not. I think there's knowing a philosopher and then trying to really know the idea. Like if I say the dialectic in Hegel, I think most people who have philosophy go, "Oh, I know what that is." But then when
Right.
you go into it, it's like, it's not just I take a side, you take a side. We go back and forth and arrive at a conclusion. The dialectic is more actually, yeah, that way of conversing in a sense manifests what's going on, but it's more ontological. It's more that things in
Mm.
themselves entail a
Mm.
tension of becoming other,
Of bothness.
of a bothness that doesn't resolve in a synthesis. I mean, that's kind of what's interesting is the term synthesis is associated with Hegel, but it's not really a synthesis. It's that an acorn entails a certain otherness of tree in it that leads to an acorn becoming a tree. Would it be a mistake to say a tree equals an acorn, right? So there's a
Mm.
instability that leads to creation,
Yeah.
right? But
Yeah.
we wouldn't say that a acorn, the synthesis of an acorn, is a tree. Right, that seems kind of problematic.
Mm. Mm. Mm.
It's more that the contradiction has a creative becoming other to
Mhm.
it, right? So the
And
point
that.
is, the concept of dialectic, you hear and go, "Oh, okay, I got it." But then when you go into it, it's like, well, actually, there's a whole kind of metaphysical notion that Hegel was getting at, and I find something similar with Deleuze. But what were you going to say?
Oh, I was just going to say that in that sense, yeah, bothness doesn't quite cover it because it's taking both things, but then almost like this third thing emerges,
Well, that's yeah,
right?
that's
That is ontologically the dialecticalness, if you can say that word, dialecticalness of things, right? That
yeah, it's that sublation, that taking the
yeah,
old into the new, that
yeah,
Aufbau
like
word in German or
right, that those
whatever.
things have something to do with the third thing, but they aren't. You couldn't like do some sort of mashup, and now that's dialectical. It's more. It's a little bit more. Like you were saying, like it makes me think of because I was thinking about how that word relates to just dialogos or something
Hmm.
like that, and why dialectic is yeah, it makes me think about the fact that in a sense you've got two people talking and they've got ideas and then something else comes out of it, and it's not just their respective ideas, but it is again this third thing.
Hmm.
um and that, I mean, understand maybe also to the thing I was thinking to ask you next is sort of, because you're talking about this process of like getting really clear on
Uh
things.
huh.
You have the concept of dialectic, you get the
Yeah.
basically the Google search
Yeah.
result
Yeah.
of what
Sure.
the
Sure.
Hegel's dialectic is, but then you need to go further into it because that reduced definition or understanding may not be the full of it.
Correct.
um and so I guess I'm just thinking about how the reason why to look further into it can matter, even though it can kind of rack your brain quite a bit, is because it gives a new possibility.
Yes.
Like
Yes.
if we don't have that understanding of the third thing in conversation, then we only ever think of conversations as kind of a mashup,
Yes.
and then even more problematically as like a you versus me, right?
Conflict.
It's a
Hmm.
conflict, and
Hmm.
if people don't understand that, dialect. It's kind of like how I mean, obviously people in the mainstream don't use dialect for like how they talk to each other. The way they're going to use it is that there are these dialects in Spain, which are the indigenous or what like regional languages, which are more specific, right? Like
Hmm.
there are lots of dialects in Spain, even though the main language is Castellano. So what I'm trying to say is though is that this understanding of a deeper meaning and really getting into the weeds can seem kind of like almost unnecessary, or like why, because it will rack your brain, and isn't it just your interpretation anyway and whatever.
Sure.
But I think that the purpose of digging in deeper is to almost, I don't know, root up or like mine something like that is going to give you a new possibility, again, a new understanding of how to do conversation, for example, or how to do whatever it is that that term's relating to, like the Deleuzian terms. But it does give you a better sense of how that conversation can happen in this new way that is an ontological thing, which then has these phenomenological ramifications.
Yeah.
Because I was going to tell ask that question of, it's a trick. It can feel like, because a lot of people also get into the weeds just to prove that their
Mhm.
interpretation is right over
Mhm.
someone else's
Mhm.
interpretation.
Mm.
So how do you feel like it can be done in the right way? And I mean, do you agree with everything I just said? And then the second question, uh, why is it important to kind of get deeper with those terms and not just take them on like this the face? I mean, I
Sure.
we obviously know it's not good just to take it on the face
Sure.
value, but why? How would you substantiate doing that? Because it can sort of seem like a work that seems risky in a sense, but also possibly very valuable. So yeah, what would you say to
Yeah,
all
well,
that?
there's a few things. First, the very fact that like Hegel's dialectic becomes other, like over time, where you find out it's something other than what you thought, kind of shows the
Mm,
dialectic in learning
mm,
itself,
mm, mm,
actually, and that there's
mm.
and you see, first off, if you take Hegel's dialectic seriously in this sense, and actually, I think all this does relate to Deleuze, and the true ignorance that we were talking about last week.
Right.
If you take seriously that dialectic, then there's no learning that doesn't entail rereading or revisiting,
Mm, mm,
because there's no stable finished thing.
mm,
That
mm,
everything kind of entails actually in its idea of becoming other, either because it proves to be
mm,
wrong,
mm,
or it proves to be missing something, or it
mm, mm,
proves to apply to 2024
mm,
different than 1890. Like we have
mm,
a tendency to learn and move on.
mm,
You take the Hegelian dialectic seriously, there's a revisiting, a rereading.
mhm.
Lewis says, C.S. Lewis said, you don't read a book that you don't read twice.
Yeah.
To be
Yeah.
literate is to reread
Hmm.
more than to read. I
Yeah.
think there's a lot of truth to that.
Yeah.
But if you never had that understanding of Hegel's dialectic, perhaps that would reduce the likelihood you would engage in that, right? So
Mm,
it's
mhm,
interesting how ideas like the dialectic or Platonic forms or all these things, you actually see this idea of it becomes other through time. And in that becoming
mm,
other, it actually becomes fuller.
mm,
Now you can ask, what's the point of doing that? Well, second, if Deleuze or Hegel or Plato or Jesus or whoever saying the gospel, if they thought it was worth going to this extra level because it's in the work, then who are you to say it's not needed, right?
mm,
Like if you're kind of like, well, we don't really need to get the fuller understanding of Hegel's dialectic. Well, he thought you did. So do you think that you're more discerning of Hegel?
mm,
Right? I think
mhm,
there's kind of an arrogance actually if you're not careful. It can kind of seem humble to say, well, we don't need to go into all that complexity. We just need to kind of accept the
mhm,
perhaps the understanding we have. But there
mhm,
can be a judgment of the thinker in that to say that they went to places that were not needed. And of course, how can you know
mhm,
that
mhm.
unless you go that there yourself,
Right.
right?
And I mean, I think a lot of times the brain probably does that just because
Save energy.
save energy.
Yeah.
And
Hmm.
also, okay, tick the box. I know what Hegel thinks. Tick the box. What's the spark notes on these
Hmm.
guys and their thoughts so that I can just say I know it or I don't have to think further. Right.
Yeah. And then
So
we
it's
do that to one another.
absolutely. So this is why it's very problematic. It's
Yes.
obviously, well, obviously in the sense of if you just think about it for a little bit, it's like yes, there are a lot of, I said it's risky to go into the weeds of it, of those terms, but it's more risky. It's a greater risk. Like you don't think you're taking a risk,
Yes.
but you're actually taking the greater risk
Yes.
to not, get into the weeds of those terms. Um,
Well, if you get
because then you
used
start to treat people
that's
and
what I was gonna
and
say,
other human beings and relations
yes.
in the same manner.
Well, when you get into the craziness of, "So what does Deleuze mean?" Okay, well, but, that kind of mental discomfort, if you habituate yourself to experiencing that, it can be easier when you listen to someone you disagree with or when someone's saying something you don't like a
Mhm,
loved one or a spouse, not to kind of
mhm.
blow up. Because 'Cause you'll
Yeah.
notice a lot of people in conversation, when they hear something they don't like. Let's say they don't like Trump and you say something positive about Trump, or they like Trump and you say something negative about it, you can just kind of see,
People that's
yeah,
kind of like this kind of visceral reaction,
visceral,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
And I would just argue wrestling with, great books or ideas can actually make hearing something like that not a big deal
Mhm.
because like having to hold together what Hegel means by the
Mm,
dialectic is very very difficult. So then holding together the
mhm,
idea that someone can like Trump as you dislike him and it not mean the world's going to end or something bad, like to
mm,
hold these conflicts because again a lot of this is holding tension,
Mm.
holding
Ah,
contradiction.
this is so perfect. Sorry,
Um,
continue.
so if you so learning how to do that in philosophy can help you, well, do that with family members so you don't
Mhm.
cut them off and never go to Thanksgiving again, or
Right.
friends or so, but please.
Well, it's just so perfect that you said that. Like, it's kind of funny, like
Yeah,
synchronistic or whatever you
yeah.
want to call it. Because as you're saying those words, those are literally the words in my brain right now,
Mm,
holding tension, because I
mhm,
was listening to a really great conversation between Michelle Chatham and Corey Malloy and a couple other women. It's on YouTube, so
mm,
anyone can find it. It's on Michelle Chatham's YouTube channel. But they're actually talking about this. They'd all gone through True North, which is Michelle's uh, her offering basically, which is a container for self development, but also couples development. And so, but the specific thing that Corey was talking about was just how she realized that how she birthed her daughter story um, was basically revealed her inability to like release and relax into the tension,
mm,
like to actually be with the tension instead of like retract, contract, and recoil in sort of the pain that can be the tension.
mm,
Obviously, in birth, it's a very physical experience, and she was like, the fact of the matter is the my birth that birth just showed me that how I was living. Like I wasn't
mm,
being able to live in holding the tension and to be able to actually sit and like ease into the tension of that, of something, again, of something, somebody bringing up something that you might not agree with, or whatever it is. And I guess I'm just relating this because to me I see it as so connected, where our bodies, I mean, that's something that I'm really interested in, like how do our bodies kind of experience and express these things, and these sort of eventful moments of physical things show us how much we're doing, what we're doing in our everyday life, because like actually the way that you can engage in a conversation, but believe it or not, is going to then have to deal with how you birth a baby. Like
yeah,
it is actually related, because yeah, so because again, like there's also something that's birthing this third thing, right? This otherness that's coming, and that, like we talked about the dialectic with Hegel, there's a third thing coming forth, right? There's a
yes,
child coming from the union of the husband and wife, and there's a third thing coming forth.
yeah,
And how do you allow that to come forth? And anyway, so it just was like, that's really interesting, because and look, like it's so there are certain areas of somebody's life. So somebody might actually, I'm trying to think, like this is kind of a personal thing that I'll sort of reflect on just in live in in this
sure,
moment. But basically, you can also be really good with holding tension in philosophical conversations, but maybe not in personal
sure,
conversations,
sure, sure,
or you could do it in certain relationships, but not others. And like the big part of integration is to learn how to do that in all areas, like in all areas, with yourself, with others, in personal relationships, with in philosophical conversations, and with your, with your family of origin, with all of those people, because if you're not, like if you're overlooking an area, it still could show up in your body, and how you're birthing a baby, or how you're birthing things, like how you're birthing your business or your art.
hmm,
It's not just related to phenomenologically birthing a baby, but it's related because it has to do with, there's almost a structure of how these things like reflect one another.
yeah,
But anyways, I just thought my brain was just buzzing and excited to hear
yeah,
that kind of, and think about connecting it with what Corey had said on that
yeah.
podcast. So yeah.
Well, I think there becomes a lot of the question. I think sometimes we think we can hold tension because we know the correct social roles.
Yeah.
So we know to be in polite at public or work. And actually, we've
Mhm.
said this before, sometimes people can treat strangers better than their spouses.
Yeah.
But there's a question is that holding tension or is that just sociological roles or
Yeah.
etiquette and
Well,
different
and then
things,
like give
right?
like maybe something a little more concrete. It's like um say, and you may find this more as you grow and develop and mature into roles, right? Like so, as a mother, you're going to have to find yourself holding certain boundaries, or saying no to certain things, or requiring certain things. It's just part of like you having children, and like how to in basically leave a place of openness for their own like process of development, but also have set a certain tone, or set a certain standard.
Mhm.
And so not for their approval, but just because that is, you're curating your home, you're making a space,
Right.
right? And so you might suddenly, like, I think how you can start to discern where this is coming up for you, and people usually just do it in the conversation, right? Like they're talking with their
Mhm.
family, or they're talking with somebody at the store, and suddenly they say something about a politician, and they have a like, people probably experience it most there, but you could also experience it in having to feel pushback, or like say you're um whatever it is, like, but especially with, just kind of paying attention to whenever you start to get kind of like nervous or it feels uncomfortable.
Right.
Like if you slow down and think about what your body is doing or what it's telling you, it will start to show you, you're having a little bit of a hard time holding tension because see, the tension is, I don't want to say no, but I know I need to say no to whatever it is, right?
Mhm.
Um, no, I think there could be some really great skills around that in learning how to not do that in sort of a demonstrative way or a kind of a way that doesn't allow for conversation, explanation, or even questions. I think that is an important thing to do. But just the ability to say, "Oh, I am." It's like, with a horse and its rider, because that's another thing that Michelle was talking about is like the fact that your horse is going to have to heed your instruction, right? But the horse is something you also have to feel, and you have to.
Mhm.
The horse and rider have this incredibly dynamic relationship where, in a sense, they're both controlling each other. Like the rider obviously is going to dictate where, like, they're going to determine what the horse is going to be doing, but it could not do that effectively if it's not able to pick up on the horse, if it's not able to be calm enough to be on the horse for the horse to be calm. So
Mhm.
it's a very again dialectical relationship, but like from that you get this flow of their relationship and what they're able to do with one another as horse and rider. And
Mhm.
I guess I'm just wanting to go a little bit more into that because and maybe for me, those are like the kinds of weeds of like, where do you show up? Where does it show up in terms of holding tension in spaces in your life or arenas in your life? But yeah, it's kind of like, oh, how did I getting comfortable with being able to lovingly say no to something and not feeling bad and not having to heap guilt on you or anyone else or your children. Like that's a place you have to develop, right? Just as somebody might have to develop actually receiving praise because maybe they
Right.
don't feel comfortable with that. It feels tension because you're like, I feel so just slowing down to say, wow, if I'm feeling uncomfortable with this or this feels hard for me, maybe this is an area I'm not holding tension well. I'm not able to hold
Mhm.
tension and sort of relax into it and just be able to be with it and allow that to teach me something and inform me about what I do need to do next or how I do need to engage now. So that was a sort of little tangent, but
Well, so there's a few I mean,
and then I
one,
want to ask you another question on Deleuze.
well, the problem of true ignorance, one, if you don't know that you can't handle tension, then you think you can, right?
Absolutely.
And
I mean,
that's
that's a problem, is
yep.
people think they can, and then suddenly these
It,
eventful moments happen, like birth or something
mm,
happens at their work or something
mm,
happens in their family, and they're like, "Help, like, I don't
yep.
know what I'm
I can't.
doing,
So
like,
they
this is I
blame the
can't."
other.
Yeah,
So
they
they
blame
blame
the
the
other.
other,
Yeah,
right? If you're
exactly.
not prepared for true ignorance,
Yeah,
then you're
yeah.
going to scapegoat.
Exactly, exactly.
Well, there, I mean, as just a quick note, there is something that seems to be the case that there's a weird way in which the way you read books can kind of train you for how you treat people.
Mm,
Like if
mm,
you read books as I've read, I don't throw it away. Well, then that's that. Like the way you
mm,
approach interpretation or think about interpretation can impact how you engage in personal relationships. Like if interpretation doesn't exist, there's just reading. You can be kind of totalitarian to the people around you because there is no interpretation. I'm just right. So there's a kind
mm,
of neurotic, forceful thing
mm,
there.
mhm,
If you believe in interpretation but not wrestling, meaning there's interpretation, this is what I got out of the book, and I never reread it again, then that's just a kind of consumerism
mm,
that's problematic. But then there's this wrestling, which
mm,
is you read Hegel and you don't know that you don't know the fullness of the
mhm,
dialectic.
mhm,
That's the
mhm.
problem. Like you
Exactly.
don't know that you don't know the
Yeah.
fullness of Deleuze. And yet,
Mm,
because you know of the existence of true ignorance, then you do know that all of the books you've misread, you will experience as having read, which
mhm.
creates a certain humility. It can create paranoia. And
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
actually very interesting, kind of how Deleuze seems to be trying to tell a difference or to suggest a difference between schizophrenia and the transversal, and that's kind of interesting. But the point is that there's a certain way of relating with things that you know if you don't fully know them, that's covered by true ignorance.
Mm,
That makes you open to revisiting them in the right time.
mm, mm,
As reality presents itself to you in a way, because there's a weird way in which reality will kind of
mm.
tell you when you know, need to go reread something.
Well, I'm so glad you brought that up because I was
Yeah.
actually going to wonder. I was going to ask you specifically, like, what do you discern in yourself or in like that is beckoning you to revisit Deleuze or like what's
Mhm.
these terms specifically?
Transversal.
Transversal. Okay,
Yes.
so what was it? I mean, was it like is there something almost that is yeah? How does it happen? How does it come upon you? Or like I really need to do that. I need to do that, and then I'll share something after that. Yeah.
There's a few things. First, if a lot of people you respect or think highly of or you know are thoughtful, like Deleuze or care about Deleuze, then you go, maybe there's something I'm missing.
Mm,
So it go, Terence Blake is like, no, Deleuze and Zizek and Hegel, these people can be thought together. You go,
mm, mm, mm,
Furthermore, if Lorenzo likes Deleuze, and also when I read Deleuze, I'm basing it a lot on difference and repetition. There's always that thing in philosophy where you do really have to look at the whole of their thought and not overly identify them with one of their texts because people change their minds or they change. The real thing that also happens is a change in emphasis. Terence Blake, and I do think he's right. A lot of people associate Deleuze with difference, like capital D difference. Really, I believe multiplicity is a better term.
mm,
And
mm,
multiplicity and difference don't sound that different,
mm.
but actually they are very
Very, very,
different.
very different.
Now, I do think there's also an issue where most people who like Deleuze fall into what I call cheap Deleuzianism, which is very
Mm,
problematic.
mhm,
And you get this kind of emphasis on essential difference and Bumblebee and becoming animal and all that stuff. But then if you're like, well, Terence Blake, and then you kind of in your mind go, surely Deleuze has to know better. There
mm.
has to be a
That
part of Deleuze that
mm,
knows better.
mm,
So you kind of in the back of your mind always have a certain openness and
mm,
getting back to, right? And
mm,
also too, it is very clear because we talk about belonging again 2-1. There is a significant difference between what I call cheap Deleuze and costly Deleuze. There is a costly Deleuze that I think we can think of in terms of Mentai Divergence, Simone Weil, and all of those different people in escaping game theory problems. Like when you bring Deleuze into that, you can go, okay, I can see what the line of flight is doing. It's helping avoid rational impasses and so on. And but nevertheless, as you gradually develop toward Deleuze, and the same thing happens with Hegel, there is a sort of sense of there's no doubt more. There's no doubt more. There's no doubt more. I'll pause and keep answering your question, but did you have something?
well, yeah, I mean, I like the fact of kind of giving the thinker the benefit of the doubt. It makes me think of our paper assuming the
Yes,
best.
absolutely.
And then 2 other things. Well, one, I guess for me, um, actually, like, just being in the same space or environment, because obviously we're
Yeah.
married, so we
Mhm.
see one another, like, whatever, grappling with certain
Mhm.
things or thinking
Mhm.
through certain things. I think what's important for me is actually to learn, and I mean, I think I do this, but if I'm honest with myself, there is a part of me that's almost like I kind of if you always assume grappling with something equals stress or something
Mhm.
like that, then that's not actually correct. I mean, maybe it's correct for some people, but it's you can't just go on and assume that like doing that work is a kind of tedious, stressful
Correct.
thing for
Correct.
no reason. And I think honestly, I think a lot of like I do think that a lot of female like not to
Yes.
say that I do think that sometimes women need to have a little bit more understanding for that process
Mhm.
for their guy, whoever
Mm.
he is and whatever he's wrestling through. Now maybe the concern is that a female's like, but my guy just goes down rabbit holes on Reddit, and it's
Sure.
like it, and
Sure.
that's the thing.
Sure.
There is a
Sure.
bad version of this.
Sure.
Like,
Yeah.
unfortunately, there
Mhm.
is a not very good version of this. But this is why I think it's important we talk about it because there is actually a good way to go about like good in the
Mhm.
sense I mean not to just give ourselves credit, you credit, but I've seen the fruits of what it means, and usually it means like substantial, you're usually putting into an essay or putting into one of our books or things like that, where it's like it's going to be going towards something that's a further step in the conversation, that you yourself feel like I'm not going to be intellectually honest or rigorous if I don't get back to that's not right, if like I can't just dismiss that thinker or not give him the best light because maybe there are some things that I don't necessarily think are quite right with that thinker. So I'll say that. And then, and another quick question. I want to know a little bit more about specifically, like, what is it? Is there this moment where you're like, I need to go back to that term?
Right. Right.
Or
Right.
do you read something and then that just suddenly is associationally like, I need to get back to that term? So, yeah, those are the 2 thoughts. What do you think there,
Well, I
Daniel?
think first off, there's a big difference between rabbit holes and wrestling with Israel, if you or wrestling with God, if you will.
Yeah.
I think a lot of men, and well, I'll say men because men perhaps can
What women
be,
can do this too.
yes, of course, and it's generalities,
Yeah.
but the obsessive nature of men, you
Mm,
could say,
mm,
which is why they can get there. It can be a real problem. Um, there is a difference between rabbit holes and wrestling.
mm, mm,
Um, They're not the same thing. Like, I've experienced a rabbit hole where you look up and you get click, 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 and you just kinda go on. Like, when you say Reddit, I
Mm.
think of rabbit holes
Oh, yeah.
because people just go on and
Well,
on.
I've been thinking about this term of like the rabbit hole of the hyperlink, right? The hyperlink,
Yes, yes,
it's not like, yeah, can it be positive? Maybe. But I think what happens is it can really take people on detours,
yes,
and it's not, and they're kind of,
and it's
it
endless.
sort of fries their brain. It
It
doesn't like it
it kills their attention. They
yeah.
can't focus,
And it's not really
not
being
toward
put
it. It's not a
toward anything
wrestling
else.
match because
So
there's no parameters.
there's no container for
There's
that,
no
because then they
container.
just, and I can, and see, here's a female example of that. Like, I've gone down little rabbit holes, and it wrecked me, like,
Yep, they
emotionally
wreck
and
you.
psychologically. I mean,
Yes,
I was also in postpartum, which means
sure.
you have to be really attentive to, like, how are you resourcing yourself? Are you
Mm,
eating? Are you, like,
mhm,
sleeping? Are you resting? Are you, like, emotionally
mhm.
giving yourself time to oh, but I wasn't paying attention. And
It
what I
pulls
was
you.
paying attention, what was catching my attention, was the rabbit hole of the internet, hyperlink, 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 and then you're just like completely, you've seen something, or learned about something. I say that in quotes because what is that
Yep,
you learn? Is that really learning about? But you've, something has captured your attention. That's now, again, it's an obsessive, all-consuming kind of
yes.
thing that then you're like, you, in a sense, you let yourself be taken over by, and
Yeah,
it's not productive, and it's bad, it's bad.
I
So I
mean
just wanted to say that,
I
like,
mean, from
and
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
and how can we differentiate that from doing a tedious study of words and going through the weeds?
Mhm,
That can be, yes, it can kind of look similar in that you're like, you're racking your
mhm,
brain, and your brain is having to really work through things, and you're having to really think,
mhm.
but it's towards something productive, and it doesn't throw you off in your life. Like, it's not messing up your ability to, like, sleep that night and have relations and eat. I mean, I know it's as simple as it is, but really, like, this is a,
I
yeah.
think it's a very important question
Yeah.
because both phenomenologies, if you will, have a continuum. They have a certain, you've grabbed something and it pulls you.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
yet the quality of that pulling is different. Like,
Mhm.
from a personal example, like, I guess I experience a radical difference between, like, I find the news as a rabbit hole.
Mm, mhm,
I
mhm.
find there's something about, like, you get, and it's,
It's a
but the
slippery
funny
slope.
thing is the news, like a Breaking Point or Young Turks or, the Hill, whatever, like these YouTube news channels, one, I find them of better quality
Sure,
than the
absolutely.
mainstream. Two, you don't want to be uninformed. And 3, it's not like you're watching stupid stuff. They're debating the new tax policy, they're debating what the
Sure.
end of tariffs mean, right? And yet, there's a certain point where you can kind of feel it just kind of
Mm,
goes
mhm.
on, and it starts coming into this place where the news courage, it feels like there's a kind of emotional, it can be, often they are pulling on getting mad or being
Yeah,
like the
yeah.
world's on fire,
I was gonna
and
say, it's either like anger or depression,
yeah, it has
like
this kind of pull
sadness,
to it.
yeah, fear.
Yes,
Yeah.
that emotional experience is different from wrestling with Deleuze.
Mm,
Because with
mhm,
Deleuze,
mhm.
there's a certain sort of don't give up. Like, you have to hold on, like, get it, don't give up. Where at the news, you're not, you feel no me, it just pulls you along,
That's the
right?
thing, like I was saying, this term, it's grabbing all your attention, and it's just
Yes,
dragging you.
yes.
Um, eh,
But with Deleuze, it's more of you have to force it to
but
grab you and to pull you
yeah, yeah.
along,
Well,
right?
you have to, like, it's like that horse, it's talking about the horse analogy,
Yes,
like, it's bucking and you're trying to get restabilized, and you're like,
yes,
"Hold on, we're
yes,
doing this, like,
yes,
we're gonna get through this."
yes,
And really quick, the dragging along also, like I said, the term, I wasn't paying attention. That's the irony.
yeah,
It's like you're suddenly, like, not paying attention to
yeah,
your, like, lived
yeah. You're not
experience
really
of, like,
paying
when did
attention.
you last eat?
Yes,
How are
yes,
you, like,
yes,
attuned to
yes,
the things in
yes,
your
yes,
actual periphery, in your actual
yes.
life, and you're paying so much attention to this this dragging effect of what the
Mhm.
internet and the hyperlink rabbit
Yeah,
holes take you down.
yeah, yeah,
So anyway, so
yeah,
back to you.
yeah, so there's a different experience in
I think
that.
that's good. Yeah.
I
Stay on
do
the
think
horse.
also with Deleuze, there's a certain sort of, you do have to have, I will say, you do have to have a certain refusal to accept your take. Like, you say, "Well, this is what I think Deleuze means," and you just have to refuse to accept that and be like, "Okay, well, in the end, yeah, there's only interpretation, but I'm not going to take that as the end point. I'm going to try to give this man the benefit of the doubt and
Mm,
see
mm.
what's going on," right? So there is a certain sort of holding on, but it is almost, I almost want to say ethical. It's like an ethical holding on where you're like, Deleuze is a human being. made in the image and likeness of God. This person put a lot of work into this, and I'm not going to treat them like they're stupid. I'm not going to
Mhm,
treat them with a kind of disrespect, right?
mhm,
There's a certain sort of I'm holding on out of respect, even though, yeah, you kind of see, in your opinion, you see what Deleuzian philosophy seems to have done to a
mhm,
lot of people. And that seems to give grounds for dismissal. But
mhm,
that's what people do with Christianity and Hegel and everyone. They say, well, look at the
mhm,
fruits. It's, by their take on it and throw it out. And
mhm,
you say, well, let's get to the core of it, right? You got to get to the core of it.
mhm, mhm.
So what were we going to say there?
Well, just really quick, like it's a funny wordplay was coming to my mind where, because I was thinking about the horse and the rider and how that relates. I was thinking about this idea of holding on. See, people typically only have that in the context of a fixed idea on the loose.
Right.
They're holding on is the clutching of like,
Yeah.
so I was thinking
Hmm.
about the rider and it's like, I'm not sure I can flesh out that analogy brilliantly on the spot right now. But what I can do is maybe switch over to my bird analogy where, how I talk
Yeah.
about like if you're clutching the bird and they've got a chain on them to your shoulder or something, is that the person who really like has a, does that bird belong, do they belong to each
Hmm.
other, or does the bird that is on the man's shoulder leaves and comes back in an hour and he's on his shoulder, do they really like belong to one another? They belong to one another, right? Not the possessive, the bird wants to go,
Right.
um so it made me think about this idea of like the wordplay of hold on.
Hmm.
Hold on is like you can hold something, but it's
Right.
also like waiting.
Yeah.
You're
Right.
holding
Hold
on.
on.
You're
Yeah.
waiting for
Absolutely.
you're
Hmm.
tarrying with, to use Cadell's term, right? Like that
Hmm.
the tarrying with that thinker. So
Hmm.
you're holding on patiently,
Hmm.
working through the questions, working
Yes.
through their text
Yeah.
again,
Yeah.
till something
Hmm.
till you
Hmm.
allow something
Yeah.
to emerge from
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
And so I thought that was kind of interesting.
Well,
Uh,
I mean, that's very good because with the news, there's a certain holding on, not letting go. With
oh
the
yeah.
news, there's a kind of hold on, let's not judge them. Hold on, hold on.
Yeah,
There
that's
is
a
a
wordplay
certain
of like,
weight.
in a sense, you're holding on to the fact that they are, like you said, you want to give them the
Yeah,
benefit of the doubt,
like for
and you're
me,
holding on as you're waiting with that process of tearing through their work again and their words and their thoughts.
yeah, I think the key is you don't hold on to a thinker's ideas, you hold on to their humanity. Like
Mhm.
Deleuze was a human being.
Yeah.
He was a person. He spent a lot of time on his work. So you're holding on
Mhm.
to their humanity and to your knowledge that they are a human being,
Yeah.
right? And therefore flawed, therefore wonderful in other ways, flawed in others,
Mm.
good ideas here, bad ideas here. That's
Yeah.
just what it means to be a human being.
Well, that makes me think too, like, see, we talked about at the beginning of the conversation, but how that will help inform how you relate to human, like,
Yes,
I mean, he's
yes.
a human too, but
They're
like
a
you're,
they're a human, not a
yeah,
political
it's like how you,
position.
that same patience, right?
Yes.
Patience with that person is also what you need with your wife or with
Yes.
your spouse or your partner or your children. Your children,
Yes.
with your neighbor. Like you need to be able to do that same thing of believing believing in their humanity, believing in the fact that they've got, that they really are, they've got a spark, they've got something there, and you don't want to just like suffocate that. You want to allow that to grow and to be able to fan the flames of what is there, that
Yes.
they really have it, and so does that mean they've got all the answers and that they're the way they brought their stuff to the world is the answer? No, but it is their answer.
Yes, it's
Like
their
it's not, maybe
answer.
not the answer, but it's their answer, and that
Mhm.
matters. It matters enough to give
Yep.
that time and care and attention, and to work with it and wrestle with it. It's the same with our children when like they're not, whatever, they're maybe doing difficult behavior, but you still need to be able to sit and remember they're a human. Like they're working through things just as much as, if not more. I mean, well, just as
Mhm.
much. It depends. Sometimes it's more for the adult, sometimes it's more for the child, but you're working through things, and believe in their goodness, believe in their humanity, believe in their ability to discern truth and learn
Yep.
truth, to believe in and see their beauty. Anyway, so yes,
Yep.
it
Absolutely. Well,
relates. It matters a lot because that process can inform and will inform how you relate to other human beings.
yes, because if you kind of go, well, they're a human being, they're not a political position, or they are not
Hmm.
the last thing they said I disagree with. Well,
Yeah.
then you hold on,
Yeah.
versus you're either going to hold on for the person or hold on to your judgment,
Mm.
and your judgment's going to take you away. And
Yeah.
that happens to people all the time. So there comes to be that part where you with someone like Deleuze, if there are people you respect and also it's very clear. Like you can't read everyone.
Sure.
But there's a big difference between saying, "Well, I haven't read all of Deleuze because he's an idiot," versus "I haven't read all of Deleuze because I haven't had time, or I
Hmm.
haven't yet, or
Yeah.
it hasn't shined, it hasn't spoke out to me."
Yeah.
Right? Like most of the time, if we haven't read something, there can be a temptation to say, "Well, I haven't read it because it's wrong." But actually, you're
Mm.
kind of it's kind of hiding. your nervousness about not having read it, right?
Mhm.
So you're actually saying, "Well, I haven't read it because I've chosen not to read it," and there's a kind of insecurity that's being hidden there, right? But I think your other question on when do you go back to a text or
Mhm.
why? Well, I mean, for me, Lorenzo and his work with Todd at Clemson, or I knew who I'd read, Difference in Repetition. I've read A Thousand Plutos. I've read these books, and it's 2013. We're talking with Lorenzo and Grant while they're here, and
Mhm.
Lorenzo's emphasizing in Deleuze this kind of overlap where you can't have certainty. We've talked about
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
But if in one person's model it contains X, in another person's model it contains X, in another person's model it contains X, well, we can never be certain about the models, but the fact that X shows up in every single model
Mm.
would provide reason to think that there's probably something true to X, right?
Yeah.
And that this becomes a method of overlap, as
Yeah.
I called it. And
Mm.
I write down the note and say, well, that's really interesting. I'll return to that. I put in a folder, SCM, social coordinate, put in a folder, Deleuze, you have it there. Then in around 2000, I don't know, 19 or something, when you're thinking through what's happening on the internet, maybe 2020, you remember that notion of overlap from Deleuze. Maybe you've mentioned it here and there in conversation. And you go to that file, you find it, you move it to a new file called SCM, and you have that in the project called belonging again 2 or
Mhm.
belonging again. Well, at that point, it's just belonging again. You don't know where it's going to go.
Yeah.
And you have belonging again done from 2016, but you've been reworking it for 2020 because you write things and leave them on your laptop forever. But then there's truth to that because you actually need to do that to go back and to test it,
Circle it, circle it,
circle it,
circle it.
circle
Yeah.
it, circle it. But then as you're going along and you start dividing belonging again out, and you have a folder called SEM, you start like over the years, you put the fragmented documents that have a little bit of right, where you've written a paragraph or two about the idea, and you start managing, and you get a file with 600 documents in it. And then what you do when you go to write is you click it, look at that, and you say, no, that's no good, and you throw it away. You put it in the use folder, in there, and then you click when you say, oh no, that actually is good. Let me write
Mhm.
that out. You put it in, then you come up to that little document you wrote
Mhm.
10 years ago on overlap, and you say, yes, I think the social coordination mechanism actually helps with overlap. Because if you have all these people online that are discussing ideas, and X shows up with Cadell, X shows up with Tim Adlin, X shows up, you say, huh, there must be something to X. So the social coordination mechanism affords an infrastructure for the epistemology of overlap.
Yeah.
Okay. You don't have certainty, but you can start seeing overlap.
Yeah.
And now maybe those overlaps are illusions and maybe it's all wrong,
Yeah.
but if you have to choose what you're going to investigate in, then it's probably a really good bet to investigate the overlap,
Mhm.
not the models, because the model, no map is the territory. Now, that doesn't mean the models are wrong, but you probably already have a model. You're already operating one, and studying another model will never give you reason to leave your model because
Right.
all models are incomplete. But if you're looking for transformation that's not merely confirming the consistency of your worldview, focusing on overlap could go a long way to a sublation or leading you to your
Mhm.
Gödel point or stuff like that, right?
Mhm.
So you start writing a section on overlap for the social coordination mechanism section and belonging in too, and then a little voice in your head goes, does Deleuze describe it as overlap though? I don't quite remember that term,
Mhm.
right? And you're like, I know this is accurate, I know this is getting at something in Deleuze, but was it exactly that wording? Because I don't want to say Deleuze overlap in writing, especially published, before you're sure of that. So then you go back to the books, you pull out the books, you think, well, I think it's in Thousand Plateaus, and you look, and it's like, oh, right, the term and transversive. And you
Transversive.
see this term, the transverse, I believe.
Mhm. Mhm.
And you're looking up this term, and you look it up, and you look it up, and you say, okay, that's more of the term he uses than overlap. Well,
Mhm.
what does that term mean again? Does it really mean overlap? And then you start looking up the
Mhm.
details, logic of sense. You say,
Mhm.
well,
Mhm.
okay, logic of sense, Thousand Plateaus, anti-edifice. You start going through and be like, well, yes, overlap is getting at it, but
Mhm.
it's also missing some things.
Yeah.
Um, and so what are those things that it's missing? And you start looking and you kind of go, huh, well, this actually might enhance the point you're making on the social
Mhm.
coordination mechanism. And actually, as you start looking about it, you start thinking about the other books he's written. It's like,
Mhm.
oh, this
Mhm.
concept actually kind
Mhm.
of changes the focus from difference. This term
Mhm. Mhm.
this term actually can mean more central to his thinking. But I'll pause.
Mm. It's all really good, and I appreciate you fleshing out how that process goes for you. And I don't know why, as you were talking, it made me think about you know, how I was saying about the tension of possibly saying no, right? Like,
Mhm,
well, this will relate, I promise. I think. Let me see if I can do it. But I guess what makes me think about, and this is something again, like Michelle and Corey will talk about, and this idea of like holding the tension. To me, I think there's also this ability to um, like let's just take that as an example of like if you feel the tension and having to say no to something,
mhm.
right? You also can get very creative with like, okay, I know what I'm saying no to, but what am I saying yes to in that
And
moment?
then yeah,
Right,
yeah,
in
yeah.
that moment you're probably also saying yes to something else, though, in the
Yes.
sense that not like, oh no, you can't have a cookie but you can have a biscotti. I'm just making up some random, but more so the sense of like there's actually usually something that not just what you're going away from, but
Yes.
what you're going toward,
Yes.
for which substantiates your no, right? And so getting slowing down to get creative with like, okay, wow, I feel that tension. Maybe there's something else I could bring in that could maybe allow me to have to um look, you're still probably gonna have to get comfortable with saying no because it's just a part of our human, we have to tell ourselves no too, like, and that's the other thing is sometimes if you're like, I'm having a hard time saying no to them, where am I having a hard time saying no to myself, right? You
Mhm.
have to kind of get, I think you can get self-reflective on that as well. But this other third element is like to bring in so again, why do I feel have a hard time saying no? Why do I have a hard time saying no to myself? Am I having a hard time saying no to myself in certain areas? And then the third thing is um what am I saying yes to? Or like, what are we? Because again, Michelle Chatham will talk a lot about like, well, what do you actually want? Like, you know what you don't want, right? But you don't know exactly what you want. And what that to me, what that makes me think about with this whole thing is, there's a question that you're wanting to answer, you're desiring to address, in say writing something like belong again, like to write a book is a in a sense is a kind of it's a work and a consistent circling toward wanting to answer something,
Mhm.
not and not doing this in the purely negative, kind of in the Isaiah Berlin
Mhm.
sense of those terms for thing.
Mhm.
But like, it also makes me think about the fact that doing this work means you're not just saying, in a sense, you're saying no and yes. Like, for example, you're saying no to yourself to just dismiss Deleuze, right?
Right.
So you're not, so you're saying don't, so no, you're not allowed to just
Mhm.
you're not, I'm not going to allow myself to just dismiss Deleuze, okay? But instead of just saying no to that, what can I give myself as a yes
Yes.
to give me purpose and
Yeah.
actionable steps and actionable
Yes.
praxis to do for the yes.
Yes.
So
Mhm.
what you want to do is answer questions about the social coordination mechanism,
Yes.
right? And that gives you a direction and a
Yes.
container and a
Yes.
space
Mhm.
like a something where to put,
To re-honor
yeah,
Deleuze.
to re-honor Deleuze, to
Right.
say I'm actually going to say yes to um tearing with Deleuze again, which can
Yes.
be hard, but it can also be productive.
For
And
the social coordination
yeah,
mechanism.
for
Yeah.
for the sense of like, in a sense, you want to honor the man, and you also want to answer this question you have, or this it's not, it can be a question, or it's this sort of like thing that's clearly coming up in our historic
Mhm.
moment of the social coordination mechanism, which we call the internet, or we,
Uh-huh.
it's another way we talk about the internet as a
Yeah.
social coordination mechanism. And I want to do that, and I, in the sense that it feels necessary to do that, and it's a yes in that direction. So I just wanted to bring that up because again, like tearing with the tension or holding the tension, I think also can require like creativity
Oh,
and
yes.
rethinking. Like, all of that feels philosophical to me, right? Where you sit and you ask like, well, what is, okay, what is it about saying no that feels hard? What am I saying no to myself? What is yes I'm saying? Can I bring that in? And all of that. But the why it matters is because it can actually help you to learn how to be better in that tension, how to hold that
Yes.
tension more, and then allow you to have a container and a work and actually something you're building and something fruitful that comes out of all of that, all of this that we're talking about, going into the weeds of a term, right, that
Yep.
a thinker has thought.
Yep.
But yeah, I appreciate you sharing the process, and I just wanted to relate it a bit back to that.
Well, I mean,
And I don't know, do
what
you
you're
think that's a
saying
fair
there,
connection?
yes, I think what you're saying is what ends up happening sometimes in the university system, the container is the specialty, or I'm a Deleuze scholar.
Hmm, hmm,
So
hmm,
what ends up happening is you got to memorize them and learn every detail in every way. And the reason you're doing that is precisely to accurately represent
hmm,
Deleuze.
hmm,
I think that leads to the kind of critique of why do that? And
hmm,
it feels like unnecessary, and you're doing all this work to simply accurately represent Deleuze.
hmm,
So the question is the following: is that honoring Deleuze, or is honoring the man Deleuze that kind of correspondence, perfect representation,
hmm.
which of course arguably is impossible, but that you could say, is a lot of the thrust of specialization is to be an accurate
Interpreter?
interpreter
Yeah.
of their thinking for good and for bad. Is that honoring Deleuze? Or is honoring Deleuze using his thinking in service of ideas he has not thought?
Honestly, I mean, the latter,
Mm,
but I think that's even so fitting for Deleuze and his
yes,
multiplicity, right?
absolutely it is.
Like, in some ways, it would
Yes,
be a even though I'm not saying it's all bad, but it's just,
yes.
in a sense, to actually that is the best way to honor a man who talks about multiplicity,
Yes, and
who
you can,
talks
of course, do both.
sure,
You can,
sure.
of course, do
And
both,
you
and
could
there's a certain degree at
yeah,
which you can't use them.
just in
You
service of your own ideas,
yes,
like,
right, then they just
at the
become
expense of what their actual work
yeah, so you
says.
have to know
Yes,
them
yes,
enough
yes.
to accurately, put them in a new container than their own thinking.
Yeah, yeah.
But notice it's not that you're taking their thinking and taking it outside of their thinking. You're taking their thinking, you're trying to put into new situations they did not think about because of the
Overlap it, right?
yeah,
That's why that
overlap it in a way,
yeah,
or to bring it sublationally into something that exists in 2026 that would not have existed in Deleuze's
right.
day.
And
So in that
he
way,
could not have known
he could not have known it, and
that.
for him, that could be like, that's actually continuing the work of
Yeah.
Deleuze. Because if Deleuze was alive today, he would be writing about the internet. He would be
Oh,
writing
yeah.
about these things, right? So in that sense, to me, you don't. It is important. You honor a thinker by continually bringing them to bear on that which they would be writing on if they were still alive.
Mm,
That's a way of you keep them alive in that, right?
mm,
So but necessarily doing that will run the risk of misinterpretation.
mm,
But it's
mm.
misinterpretation in service of keeping them in the discussion,
Yeah.
right? But you see, a lot of times people can perhaps bring thinkers to show why they're wrong. Like, look what's happening today. This shows that you're wrong, right? This shows that this thinker was wrong. That can be a
Mhm.
lot of
Mm.
what goes on. And that's where you honor the person. Uh, you kind of go, Deleuze ain't that dumb. Like, he's not that dumb. This is an individual that really worked hard. For me, if you're going to say that some new historical event disproves a thinker or shows that they were a fool, then you really need to make that case. And just over the years, gradually and slowly, you realize that these thinkers, none of them fit easily into a box. None of
Yeah.
the great thinkers are, they tend to be tragic thinkers with trade-offs. It's
Mhm.
always way more complex than you
Mhm.
realize, in my view. Now, to what degree is it worth your time to learn those complexities? Well, to the degree there's some creative container that you're working them into. So for me, honoring a thinker, to just go back to that, is bringing them to bear on something new that isn't in the spirit of how they thought, that's
Mhm.
also in the spirit of their interests.
Mhm.
And I think Deleuze is absolutely relevant to the internet because of the multiplicity, because of the
Mhm.
flows, because of the intensities, and all of these other things that he's so interested in. So for me, it is appropriate to bring Deleuze into conversation with these things. Um, Furthermore, I guess what I was also going to say is what you're saying about the tension
Yeah.
is actually, I think, very interesting
Mm.
because there is a way in which, when we're talking about this transversive, um, there's something about that that's a lot about tension. And another
Interesting.
reason why this is important is because a lot of people associate, Deleuze with this kind of pure positivity, pure excess, and different things. And Dr. Blake pushes back against that, and it does seem to me in Deleuze that it's not pure positivity, that there's a certain tension that has to be maintained. And so, I guess to say just very quickly, well, the transversive, as I understand, which is a mathematical term, we can say is a necessary connection where a transgental is
Tangential? Tangential?
tangential is in kind of a happenstance
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
connection. They happen to connect, but it doesn't really mean anything. Where the transversive is something that they actually, it's a necessary overlap. Like there's a
Mhm,
kind of
mhm,
necessary
mhm.
connection. I think a way you could think about it is the tangential, it
Yeah.
intersects and kind of keeps going, whereas the transverse, it kind of runs along one another. They more kind of map
Yeah, yeah.
on to one another. So the thing that Deleuze is kind of arguing, notably in the logic of sense, where he talks a lot about Alice in Wonderland, but the
Mm.
logic of sense, it's one of the key arguments he wants to make is that there's no such thing as an isolated process.
Mm,
And what we mean is right now, There is a emotional process going as we talk.
Mhm.
There's a psychological process going as we
Mhm.
talk. There is a linguistical process. There's a
Yeah.
biological. There's a chemical. There's a physical.
Mhm.
There is no world in which I think the claim he makes is that there's no situation in which there aren't at least two processes going on.
Hmm.
Okay,
Yeah.
so there's no one process. There's always two processes. Sequence is another term, I believe. Sequentia, like there's a sequence, and so
Squinch, yeah.
also biology. There's
Mhm.
biological sequences.
Mhm.
There's chemical
Mhm.
sequences. There's emotional sequences, like
Right.
sequence. This thing follows this and this. There's no such thing as a single sequence. There's always multiple
Mm.
sequences at the same time. Um, Meaning sense is what arises between processes.
Mhm.
Like sense is not found just in biology.
Mhm.
It's also not found just in linguistics.
Yeah.
It's always or just psychology. Like sense is in the between space.
Yeah.
It's between processes,
Mhm.
right? But that means sense and meaning and all of that can't be located in a process but between processes.
Yeah.
The betweenness is pointing to the transversive, like the multiplicity of processes.
Mm.
Sense is what cuts across them in a way.
Mhm.
Now there is an ambiguity I'm not sure about in Deleuze, where it's not clear if the term transversive means the multiplicity of processes happening at the same time, or the thing that cuts between them. Like,
Mm.
is
Mm.
it because the funny thing is, if it's what cuts between, I do think it's kind of both. And Deleuze seems to want to do this thing where well, we know this from the end of difference and repetition against epistemologies of representation. He doesn't want identity. Okay. So he doesn't want a stable identity. He doesn't want stable definition. Um, so in a sense, he wants difference. And in a way, there's a difference between all of the biology and all of that.
Mhm.
And,
Mhm.
Alexander Ilung would talk about vector theory and
Yeah. Yeah.
different, so there's different vectors. Um, None of which are reducible to one another. Um, but there is nevertheless things that cut between them. And then in a very weird way, if I talk about a chair, if a chair is a multiplicity of processes, and it's not located in any one of those processes, then the chairness is the transversive principle. It is kind of
Mm.
it's what trans
Mm.
it goes across the vectors. So
Yeah.
there is no chair as a stable identity, just as a transverse. And I
Cool.
believe I'm saying that term correctly, but I'm famous for saying words incorrectly. But
Mm.
but in that way, then the transversive is the Platonic form
Mm.
in this sense, right? But it is the form. Um, but also Deleuze does not want to talk about form too much. So he
Mm.
wants to
Mm.
describe how the multiplicity, like there's something about the chair that it is the intersection.
Right.
It
Right.
is the intersections of the multiplicity. So, but when the multiplicities intersect, they never collapse into one another.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the chair is the intersection, but the intersection itself is not a stable identity. It's where the
Yeah.
things
Yeah.
cross. Okay, so this is where it's confusing.
Yeah.
So you could call the chair is a crossing, like more than a form, it's kind of a crossing. It's kind of what arises in the crossing
Of
of
this.
all of these
Yeah. Yeah.
vectors. Um, and yet it has enough stability to be intelligible.
Mhm. Mhm.
I do think that is not as against Platonic forms as it may
Yeah.
seem.
Yeah.
And Deleuze
Actually.
certainly did not like Hegel, but ironically, and Zizek has pointed this out, Deleuze has more Hegelian thinking than he realizes.
Yeah.
And certainly Deleuzian thought there is pointing toward what people call new materialism
Mm.
today,
Mm. Mm.
which gets into Snowden and people like that. But the point is that therefore chairness is a certain tension
Mhm.
between intersections
Yeah.
of vectors
Yeah.
that it arises, and it maintains its chairness in a certain instability.
Right.
What you could say is, as you move from physics to mind, the holding together of the multiplicity into something intelligible becomes harder and harder and harder. And I think what you're describing about the holding on and maintaining tension, that's how you keep it
Mm.
informed.
Mm.
And
Mm.
if you
Mm.
can't
Mm.
handle
Mm.
tension, then it just shatters into its multiplicity. And I guess I also say
Mm.
this because what is interesting in Deleuze. So basically, I want to say the social coordination mechanism trains us in flows, trains us in
Yeah.
multiplicities.
Yeah.
So we get habituated to many things happening and holding it together and then it falling apart and bringing it back together. Like
Mhm.
it's actually habituating you into a subjectivity
Yes.
that is more aligned with the transversive
Transversive, right.
in the way that he is describing it.
Yeah, that's great.
Transvective, transverse, but it has this, you're getting kind of habituated into it, which is also habituating you into a subjectivity that can handle that tension, and not let it fall apart. And you actually get used to also too what
Mm,
happens in conversation. Someone's talking about this, someone's talking about this, and they what do? The
mm,
multiplicities flow,
mm,
and then something cuts across. Like you see a connection, you
mm,
discern a form, you discern an overlap, right?
mm,
And the intelligibility that you see on the social coordination mechanism tends to be from these overlapping
mhm.
discourses that then something arises too. Well, for Deleuze, that's isomorphic to reality.
Yeah, yeah.
That is what occurs.
Mm,
And
mm.
so the social coordination mechanism is kind of training us in that way.
Yeah.
And it's pointing to that. And I guess what I want to say though is there is a question, as I understand it, and it could be entirely wrong, the schizophrenic, because he
Mm,
has this schizoanalysis in his work, and he thinks about
mhm.
capitalism and schizophrenia together. Schizophrenia is when you have multiplicities, but not the ability to cohere, not the ability to
To
make
have the
a.
transversive?
Yes, that's correct. You
Okay.
can't make it's the multiplicity without the transversive.
Mhm.
And but then the question is what generates the transversive then?
Yeah,
Because
yeah,
if the
yeah.
multiplicity, like what's the difference between a multiplicity that generates something intelligible, something transversive, um,
Mm,
versus a multiplicity that cannot? Where does that come from? Right? When does the transversive form versus stay
mm,
a multiplicity
mm,
that's
mm,
schizophrenic,
mm,
right?
mm,
And so basically, there's a way in which Deleuze is saying reality is schizophrenic. Actually, reality is this
mm,
multiplicity, and that what reality becomes
mm.
intelligible to the degree we somehow are able to make reality transvective in a certain way.
Transversive? Mm,
Transvective. I'm
mm.
now questioning myself because
It's
I
okay,
read
it's
the
okay.
word so many times. Because transverse means overcome, but I do believe it's transverse because it's crossing.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, so, um, so how do you maintain a transversive state and not a schizophrenic? Well, holding the tension somehow. There is some sort of
Mm,
holding on that's going
mm,
on that seems to make that difference. Whereas in
mm,
schizophrenia, you come to just give into the multiplicity. You don't
mm,
hold anything. You
mhm.
just give
Yeah.
in to the multiplicity.
Which
And
actually can feel very tense too.
it leads to
Like,
mental
it's
illness. I mean,
well,
please.
what I'm saying is, like, there's almost like this ablated form of tension, and then there's the tension of a mental illness.
Yes. Yeah.
You
Oh,
know what I'm
sure,
saying?
sure,
Like,
sure, 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 sure. Yeah, absolutely. There's
that's
mastering the tension or
that's
being
the hard part
mastered by
because
the tension,
exactly,
right?
exactly.
Yeah. The weird thing, I guess what I'll just add is so there's a way
And
in
then
which, for him, capitalism is a kind of just lose yourself in the flows,
mhm,
lose
mhm,
yourself in the multiplicity.
mhm,
Um, and what's I can't quite tell is it seems as if there's a way
mhm,
in which the schizopolitics is basically trying to make the system just see itself as itself.
mm,
Like it is schizophrenic, so let's like make it schizophrenic, and that actually would lead to the transversive. Like then you would say, well, this is not sustainable. So I can't
mm,
because
mm,
there's an interesting political there's a very interesting political project, honestly, in Deleuze and Guattari, that
mhm,
is this kind of idea of making the system see itself as schizophrenic. But the move there is like, well, are they saying therefore schizophrenia is liberation?
yeah, yeah,
There's
yeah,
a
yeah,
certain
yeah,
sense in which they are saying that, but there's another sense in which it's actually then to make you realize what the system already is precisely so you begin learning how to handle the tension of the transvective.
mm, mm,
Now, to what degree I'm not sure about is they may push back against this idea of holding on to the transvective because they would be like, well, that simply is what emerges in multiplicity.
mm.
But then that gets into actually, well, this is where I would want to bring in Aristotle and virtue ethics and all that different jazz. But I will pause and give it to you.
Well, it makes me wonder two things, like what do they think about language and what do they think about phenomenology, Guattari and Deleuze,
Mm,
because the thing is that our language holds the transversive of the chair
hmm
when we call it chair, right? Even
mm,
though chair as an
mm,
identity is actually the opposite. Like, in a
mhm,
sense, what we're holding together as chair is its anti-identity, because it's really, when we say that, it's
mhm.
actually the multiplicity of uh what did you call them? The multiplicity of
The vectors, the flows,
processes, or what was it?
processes, yeah,
That's
sequences,
sequences that are
yeah.
going on.
Mhm.
So what I mean to say is, wouldn't in this,
Well,
but
for them, language is going to be transvective. It's going to have this transvective
yeah,
quality
or
because it cuts across.
transversive quality.
Yeah, because when I speak to you, it's
Yeah.
going to be linguistical, emotional, psychological meaning, biological. It's going to be all
Mhm.
these different
Mhm.
things. And so meaning is betweenness. And there
Mhm.
is something about the transversive that seems to align with the metaxis of Desmond. They seem to have
Yeah.
some over the betweenness. I
Mhm.
think for them, the problem is language tends to crystallize into a stable state, so we need to keep it associational
Okay.
because the
Okay.
association is what reminds you that there's no stable meaning. There's only the
Kind of like the
movement.
idea that there is no chair, there's this chair,
Yeah.
kind of thing.
Well,
No, no.
yes, yes. In the sense of there's this transversive, there's this crossing
Right, right.
over
We
different
couldn't
things.
necessarily say it's chair, even
Well,
though it's
that's where
intelligible to us as chair.
it is intelligible to us as chair, but it's not reducible to that intelligibility because there's way more of the chair that you don't know than do,
Sure.
right?
Sure.
So there's something here about a certain participation in the ever
Mm.
unfolding
Yeah.
of the
Yeah.
crossing. And then I guess this is where you start linking Hegel and Deleuze because you would start saying, well, there's a certain negativity you need to get used to
Yeah. Yeah.
that you don't, that you, that you have to bring some sort of agency into to
Yes. Yes. Yes.
handle,
I was
right?
thinking about that
Yes.
too, as agency, where humans seem to be able to like enact a transversive process, because even that's a
Yes,
process, could be a
yes,
process
yes.
too,
But
right?
how do you speak of agency and not speak of identity? That
Mm-hmm.
becomes kind of
Mm-hmm.
the hanging question.
Well, the reason why I ask about phenomenology is because as you were describing all of that, which is all really good, it made me think about the multiplicity of why do I keep forgetting the term, the S word,
A sequence?
sequences. Yes,
Yeah.
the multiplicity of sequences being schizophrenic, like they're saying this is just the nature of things.
Mhm.
But if we think about like what is the quality of that experience, obviously schizophrenia is this is
Mhm.
not like it. This is I mean, I don't know what they would say about
Yeah.
schizophrenia.
Yeah.
Would they say that that's not a great experience phenomenologically, qualitatively?
Well, I mean, I don't think they want to judge,
Okay, sure.
but there is a certain sort of. But that's what I'm saying. There's
It's
this
hard to know,
liberation, but
but is this
also, would we get better at being transversive if things were schizophrenic? Would we be better at association or not? If
mm,
so, then there'd be a kind of point of, I want to say, Ebert saturation. There'd be a point of
yeah.
necessary redemption in it, right?
Well, because
So,
also though, if you're not going to say, if you're going to just say it is schizophrenic, we're not going to say it's good or bad,
mhm,
but you're going to call capitalism schizophrenic as a kind
mhm,
of critique.
yes,
Okay,
yes.
but that is itself, and
But
I,
there's schizophrenia as a system, and then there's the individual schizophrenic. Which the individual schizophrenic, you'd be like, well, they're just habituated to the system, so they're not bad, or that. And then it's kind of an
sure.
irony because you're saying that's bad, but the system is schizophrenic, and being successful is being successful in the system. So what does it mean to be? There's like it's not really bad. If it's bad, then you have to say the system is bad, right? So you
Well, and
see
also,
this
don't
kind of
you need
irony.
identities to determine if things are bad or not? And also,
Well,
if you're going to critique schizophrenic capitalism, isn't that an identity you're critiquing potentially?
that's what I'm saying. There seems to be things that
Yeah.
have to be thought, but
Well, and
but there,
yeah,
but
but
I
really
get
quick though, really quick, I do think like the other reason why I asked about phenomenology with Deleuze and Guattari is because it made me think about transversive, where you said there's nothing that I know we're using form and they
yes.
wouldn't, but necessarily, but it makes me think about this idea of the multiplicity of sequences being the the rabbit hole of the Reddit and the
Mhm.
online, where you're just kind of like, oh my
Mhm.
gosh, this is just
Mhm.
dragging me
Mhm.
along,
Mhm.
and that feeling kind of schizophrenic
Mhm.
sometimes,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
Versus the same very process, but the transversive coming through to say this is
There
toward a
there
work,
is
this
something
is
about the
toward, and I don't know if I don't want to reduce it to like teleology, but like it does make me think of that, like where there's something that goes through that
yeah.
that says
Yeah,
like
now
this
he's
is
gonna
the.
reject teleology,
I know,
but,
I know.
yeah.
I mean, I know he would,
Um,
but it made me think of that though, because
yeah,
like
okay.
the phenomenon, because it's like, okay, well, what is the actual, again, going back to the quality of the experience of schizophrenia as something that would be negative, experience as something negative, versus it being like, okay, well, it is schizophrenic, but there's a redemptive element to it in that we as the humans have this sort of ability to, maybe it is always co-creative, because again, this multiplicity,
Mhm.
to co-create apprehension of the transverse,
Mhm.
right, where it's actually something that is productive, not productive in the sort of
Mhm.
capitalistic sense or
Mhm.
but it's productive in the qualitative sense, like it's fruitful in that way, it holds something together, at least for enough time that it becomes like intelligible.
Yes. I think what they would want to say, there's a few things. First, I think this gets into why they're very interested in cinema. Deleuze, they
Yeah.
have these books on cinema because there's something about cinema that unveils the way you can have the transversus and stable identity, and yet it's just they're frames that don't
Mhm.
actually go together. Like
Interesting.
cinema, I think the term might be virtual. They would say virtual is, as I understand it, where multiplicities can meet.
Mm.
So a virtual space is where transverse can occur
Yeah,
because
yeah.
multiplicities can come together and thus a transversion could occur. They would want to say the transversion and thus identity is more like an event. It's a
Okay.
surprise. It's something that has to unveil itself to you. As long as by identity you mean a process you cannot close,
Sure, sure.
in that something is virtual, things are, I suppose, a stable thing is that which is virtual.
Mm.
It is a possible meeting ground of
Yeah.
multiplicities, and that when they come together, it cannot be predicted how they would come together.
Mhm,
Okay, so
mhm,
there's this kind of open-endedness, right?
mhm.
Which I think gets into a lot of what we talk about,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
The question becomes, why does a thing hold together as X virtual space versus
Mm,
YX
mhm. Yeah.
virtual space. Why this virtual space and not another virtual
Yeah, yeah.
space, right? Now he loves Bergson, so it'd be more like time space, and he points to Whitehead.
Yeah.
So
Deleuze does?
yeah.
Okay.
So why does a thing take the virtual space it does?
Mhm.
Of which, in taking that virtual space, and all of this can be entirely wrong.
Mhm,
So please, all this is entirely wrong. That's the fun.
mhm.
Is that the question is why this virtual space and not another? And then the question also becomes agency for what?
Yeah, yeah. And
Because
how maybe
because
even.
if what a thing is must be surprising and encountering. And please note the social coordination mechanism is a material infrastructure that habituates you and trains you toward this reality even in terms of your subconscious.
Yeah.
So we've never had an infrastructure that could do that.
Yeah, yeah.
So every infrastructure we've had has like the classroom and all the thing we were saying
Last week.
last week. They have habituated us subconsciously toward the stable identity.
Yeah.
I know we're running
Ignorance.
out of time.
Yeah, we are.
Right toward, Now, also note in the stable identity, true ignorance is kind of something unexpected in a problem. But in this Deleuzian encounter and surprise, everything has something you don't know, what you don't know, because it has to unveil itself, right? You can't know what a thing is, and even know you don't know what a thing is, because it always has to manifest
Mhm,
as an
mhm.
event
Yeah.
of the crossing
Well, and that's
multiplicities.
yeah, that's why it's a very great concept on Deleuze's part where
Hmm.
it is actually informing and demonstrating
Yeah,
the fact of true
absolutely. And
ignorance,
and
the
you've got
reality of
yes,
true
it is.
ignorance.
And
Yeah.
you've got to be able to handle the
Yeah, yeah,
surprise and the
yeah.
tension. But the question becomes if the unfolding of things is surprising,
Yeah, yeah.
it is necessarily surprising, then what are you generating agency for? What is the
Mm.
agency for? Because the thing it is for, you can't know. It has to surprise you. Well, the agency, we talk about the agency has to be on the side of prepared for the event, not planning the event, prepared for the event. You have to be prepared for the unexpected. And also, and we've spoken about this at the net, Jock and Javier, all the people. It does seem as if agency has something to do with the ability to observe beauty, and
Mhm.
there's something about the virtual, like what happens in the transversive is
Yeah.
the potential for beauty,
Yeah, yeah.
and that the chair takes the virtual shape that it does and is moved toward the virtual shape by the craftsman because there's a lack the lack of the chair, the present absence, orients the agency to operate in such a manner that increases the probability of a virtual space being generated that then brings forth a surprise that is that chair.
Yeah.
So lack and virtual kind of go together here. Now, it depends on what you mean by lack. But the chair is the lack. It is its lack, as Jockin has put it, and
Yeah, yeah,
it
yeah. Hmm.
and the virtual is lacking,
Hmm.
and yet that very lack is the space where the multiplicities can cross
In the
and
transversive.
transfer and something transversive occur.
Yeah.
That seems to be what's going on. That would, of course, make time more primary than space in a certain sense because this is a temporal unfolding. Um, And it would also have to be a very open-ended process. Now, all that can be wrong. Way more needs to be said, but I think that is at least gesturing toward Deleuze.
Mm,
And all of that, if it is so, the reason why it comes back up is because the social coordination mechanism, what's going on in life. Let's put it this way: to use the internet as a social coordination mechanism is to use it as transversive. The other ways to use the internet are schizophrenic. So
yeah,
basically,
exactly.
this is a question of using the internet more in a transversive way
Absolutely. Absolutely.
versus a schizophrenic way. And
Absolutely.
AI is just going to make this more and more the case as the
Absolutely.
psychosis and all of that kind of takes off. The internet, and again, like I've said, it sometimes is helpful to not even talk about the internet, just talk about the social coordination mechanism. But that distinction is elucidated a bit, I suppose, by this Deleuzian distinction, as I understand it, and could be wrong, between the
Mhm.
transversive and the schizophrenic. And so you return to Deleuze because they provide language to help you articulate something that you believe is pressing and you believe would honor Deleuze to do that. And that also becomes a reminder that your first impressions of thinkers can be wrong, which can be a
Mhm.
reminder in your everyday life that you can be doing that to your neighbor.
Mhm.
And so that entire sort of motion, I think, can be enhancing and help one philosophize their life in a good way.
Yeah, 100%, babe.
But we are out of time. Thank you so
Yes.
much.
Thank you all.
Appreciate it. For more, please Amazon. You can get our books. We
Yep.
appreciate it.
Cheers.com.
ogrose.com. Twitter, I've just realized
Yeah, yeah.
Twitter doesn't exist either. It's X.
Yeah, yeah.
So I was catching
So
myself
X
on
is
the Anchor Spotify
it.
thing, but I never even questioned that.
Yeah.
But does anyone call it X? I don't know. It's
Probably
like
not.
I don't. It's like it's Twitter. Come on.
Cheers, guys.
It's Xter or something. But you can find us in those places, and always good to talk to
On
you.
YouTube.